Hello everyone and welcome to episode 1 of the Crohn's Cast, dangerous at both ends and crafty in the middle. Hello everyone and welcome to the first ever podcast that I've recorded aimed at people with Crohn's disease and various other inflammatory bowel diseases like colitis, ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel syndrome, and anything in between that I can cover in these short spaces of time. I'm going to try and do this as a kind of a free-form podcast. I'm not going to be too perfectionist about this because I've had many ideas recently and they've all been kind of cancelled out by the fact that I know I'm a perfectionist when it comes to editing. So I'm going to try and make it as natural as possible. And one of those includes having my phone nearly die constantly as I try and read the notes from it. So before I get going, I want to thank the people who are responsible for the intro song that you heard there. That was a song called Cassiopeia by the wonderful Bristol-based, I don't think I'm wrong in saying they're Bristol-based, British folk band 3 Cane Whale. They gave me specific permission to use it as my intro theme. They are an incredibly talented trio of folk musicians. They've performed all over the world, various different high-profile venues. Cerys Matthews has, she said that their debut album was one of the top 5 modern folk albums, and I think modern in this sense kind of means anything after World War II. So that's quite a prestigious honour, and Cerys, you know, she knows what she's talking about. So thank you very much to the members of 3 Cane Whale for giving me specific permission to use their music as the opening to my podcast. If you would like to listen to more of their stuff, please, it's available on iTunes, and they have their own website, 3canewhale.com, and obviously there are various other places you can get their music from. I would highly recommend listening to it. If you are someone who's in the same position as me and who maybe needs to relax and use some slightly more soothing and calming music to help you unwind and lower your blood pressure a little bit, 3 Cane Whale, particularly their debut eponymous album, is a really wonderful way of experiencing a slightly more relaxing, folky kind of vibe. So if you do enjoy that kind of music, or if you just want to relax, or hear something completely new that you may not have heard before, because believe me, 5 years ago I would never have thought of listening to folk music, but I've really become interested in it recently, and I found it really wonderful to listen to, and just, you know, wonderful and relaxing. So please give them a listen, and once again, thank you very much for allowing me to use it. Now, hopefully the various outlets that I'll be putting this podcast on don't immediately pull the podcast because whatever various automated algorithms pick it up as some sort of copyrighted material that I don't have permission for. I promise you, robots and algorithms out there, I do have permission to use this music. Paul Bradley himself said yes, it's fine. So, and that's one of the 3 who wrote it. So please let me keep my podcast going. Thank you. And that includes you, YouTube. I'm watching you. So now on to the second point of my little list in front of me here. It's good to keep lists because I really do have a terrible memory. So number 2, reason for doing the podcast. So I have been looking for as much information as possible when it comes to Crohn's disease and IBDs and things like that. And pretty much all of my information has either come from doctors or from other people. And usually it comes in the form of advice. It comes in the form of a story about their experiences with the disease that they may suffer from, or it'll come in the form of quite, how do I put this in a polite as possible way, quite stiff, jargon-filled diagnostic terms. So when you want to learn about a disease, obviously one of the first places you want to go is your doctor. You've got to find out what it means for your life, what it means for your future going forward, what it means for your diet, all of that stuff. And that's great. It's very useful. And obviously you need to keep your doctor a huge part of the process, especially when it comes to asking for advice. The problem is, there is a point at which medical advice and terminology starts to blur into the background noise of it all. It's not that useful after a certain point. You need to engage with people who are already suffering from the condition or who have found success in dealing with their various diagnoses. Now, I'm at an early stage in my Crohn's diagnosis. I've probably had it for about 4 years, but I've only been diagnosed with it for 2. So I went 2 years undiagnosed, which is not uncommon for an IBD. It can go years and years without being fully properly diagnosed. But the one thing that frustrated me is, and I have talked to a few people on various other platforms like Twitter and through support groups and things like that, I've spoken to people and there's no kind of centralized platform that isn't really run by a doctor. And, you know, doctors are great, they're very, very useful, but I feel there comes a point where you have to describe it in non-medical terms, and that's what I'm hoping to do here, because what I would like is, if you are a sufferer of an IBD, Crohn's, colitis, whatever it may be, get in touch with me. The Twitter handle is @thecrohnscast, and you can send me a direct message on there. And if you have any questions, or if you have any tips, or if you have any information that you would like to share with people who may or may not end up listening to this podcast, I mean, who knows, this could be a complete dismal failure and it's just me talking to myself in what is basically a very deep window in my house. If you would like to do anything around that, please get in touch. I will try and include an email as well in the information for this podcast. I can't remember it off the top of my head. I've only just opened it, and these things never stick. I think it's something like the Crohn's podcast @gmail.com, but don't hold me to that. I will try and find it out and put it in some sort of description. So if you have any lifestyle tips, any health tips, any advice, any stories you'd like to share, any kind of, be they slightly horrible or enlightening or, I don't know, generally life affirming, anything like that, please get in touch with me and I will do all I can to feature it in one of my future podcasts. This is a bit of a departure for me. I used to do stuff like this many, many years ago. I haven't done a podcast in, let's think about this now, it's got to be at least 6 years, possibly even longer. So it's quite a change for me. I'm getting back into the flow of things. I don't even know how I sound, how I come across. I'm a very different person from the person who used to do this a long time ago. So hopefully I'm still not too bad at it, but you know, we'll see how these things go. Okay, looking at my notes, I'm on to section 3 now. Obviously, I'm going to try in future to make these podcasts as kind of as similarly structured as possible. And what I thought everybody could get on board with would be the idea of a news segment, and that'll just be anything that affects the community, really. It could be a new treatment, it could be something to do with a new level of diagnosis, it could be anything. So this week I've decided to go with a story that's a little bit older than I would normally have gone for. I'd like to keep things as up to date as possible, but you can't always get news stories every single week to do with inflammatory bowel diseases, so I'm just going to have a look at this story I found a few weeks ago, which was featured very heavily on the BBC, and as far as I can tell has quite significant implications for the IBD community. So this is a story that has kind of, I guess, come about because of the changes as far as medical marijuana is concerned in the United States, and we're now starting to adopt a similar process in the United Kingdom. The title from the BBC in their health column is "Medical Cannabis Products Available on Prescription." I'll just read you the article, or at least some of it anyway. I'm not going to read the full thing. The BBC waffle a bit. Medicinal cannabis products can now be legally prescribed to some patients across the UK for the first time. The treatments can be prescribed only by specialist doctors in a limited number of circumstances where other medicines have failed. The decision to relax the rules on treatments followed an outcry over 2 boys with severe epilepsy being denied access to cannabis oil, but one charity fears access to it will be much more limited than expected. Among those who stand to benefit will be children with rare, severe forms of epilepsy who can receive the treatments. As of Thursday, cannabis-based products can be prescribed, but only specialist hospital doctors in a small number of cases and not by GPs. So that's obviously a big thing. You can't just go down to your local GP and say, look, can I have cannabis oil on prescription? Now, there's a big caveat to this story, which I will talk about after I've finished reading it. New NHS guidance for doctors in England say it would be prescribed only where there is a clear published evidence of its benefit and other treatment options have been exhausted. The treatment can be described in cases of children with rare, severe forms of epilepsy, adults with vomiting or nausea caused by chemotherapy, and adults with muscle stiffness caused by multiple sclerosis, so MS for short. If a patient is not already in touch with a specialist doctor, they can be referred to one by their GP if the doctor deems this is appropriate. So there's kind of a series of steps you have to go through before you can access this. Now, so that's the end of the story. Obviously, you might be wondering why I'm talking about CBD oil when the article itself mostly aims, it mostly talks about its use with severe epilepsy in children and adults with multiple sclerosis. Now, I've had this confirmed to me by a couple of people in the Welsh NHS who, are aware of these things, that cannabis oil or CBD oil has been used and has been shown to have a positive effect on the problems associated with Crohn's disease and various other inflammatory bowel disorders and diseases. As far as I can tell, the idea is you would take a certain amount of it every day and it can possibly reduce inflammation. It also helps with pain management, which is obviously going to be a huge benefit to a number of people with Crohn's and IBD related problems. But also, and here's the interesting thing, it can also help improve mood. So if you do have mental health issues when it comes to your IBD or the side effects of your IBD treatment or anything like that, the cannabis oil can be of huge benefit to you, at least incrementally. I say incrementally because there is no magic cure for my Crohn's disease and for Crohn's disease in general. You can manage it as best you can. You can minimize flare-ups. You can change your lifestyle entirely. You may still end up getting flare-ups. There's still no hard and fast cure for the disease itself outside of surgery. And to be honest, I would be, at this point in my life, I'd be quite happy to go up to a doctor and say, look, just take it all out and put like a pipe in. Anything... anything that's going to make my life a little bit easier and isn't surgery is always welcome. Now, I am actually on CBD oil, cannabis oil, and before anyone who is not familiar with it, because there was some controversy around the legal prescription of cannabis oil, and a lot of people have got the wrong idea. Look, you're not going to get a big bag of weed. Okay, it's just not that simple. It would be interesting if that were to happen, if your local GP just opened a drawer and there's a weird stench coming from it. It's not that, okay? CBD oil is cannabidiol. Okay, so there's 2 forms. When people are rolling up their joints, there's 2 elements that go into the cannabis that they're smoking. There's the cannabidiol, and then there's the THC. Now, the THC is the psychoactive element, so that's the stuff that gets you right off your head, completely stoned out of your tree. The cannabidiol stuff is the stuff that can help stop the growth of cancer cells. It's also the stuff that helps reduce inflammation and can help control pain. So the obvious benefit to having that in some sort of oil form is that it can help you. Now, there's nothing to say that you can't buy this stuff on the internet. There's nothing illegal about buying cannabis oil on the internet in the UK and probably around the world. I can't speak for our American cousins or anyone else who might be listening in any other part of the world. What I can say is I have bought cannabis oil. There are various strengths you can buy. I think it goes up in increments of 10 milligrams. So currently I'm on the lowest increment, which is 10 milligrams per whatever. I didn't really read up on it, to be honest. I just got the lowest dose. The other issue with this is it is an unregulated market, and like a lot of products that you can buy online, a lot of medicines, you might end up buying snake oil. And that's the problem, is that there are a lot of charlatans out there who will sell you garbage for huge sums of money. So for the love of all that is merciful in the world, do a little bit of research, probably more than I did, do a little bit more research into what's good, what works, and try and read as many studies as possible. The stuff I'm taking is, pause while I go and get it, it is by a company called Native Botanics, 10% hemp drops, full spectrum, 1,000 milligrams, 100% natural, and it comes in a 10 milliliter droplet. It comes with a little dropper thing, what they called? Pipettes, I think, something like that. So the reason I went with this, and it might sound like an odd reason for it, I didn't know anything about the market, and I thought, well, what do you do when you don't know anything about a market when it comes to medical-based products? I went with the product that Holland and Barrett had in store. It may not be the most effective. For all I know, it may be one of the less effective possible products, but the fact that it's been approved by a major UK retailer gives me a certain amount of security in my decision. So I've been taking it for about 2 months now, and I will say that whenever I take something for my Crohn's disease, and whether I'm using it to improve my health or my day-to-day functions or my ability to live my life, what I look for in the stuff that I use is incremental benefits, incremental increases and slight improvements in my lifestyle, and this has given me that. Now, in future episodes, in fact probably in the next one, because I don't want to deny you this thing, I will be talking about a product that gave me the best results, and I honestly can't understand why everyone isn't being prescribed this in the UK, whether they have Crohn's or not, because this stuff that I will tell you about next week, it is fantastic. By the way, I'm not being sponsored to say any of this, I'm just talking about results I found in myself, because I've gone from, in 2 years, basically being bedridden to living a reasonably normal life. I still can't work yet. I can't get out and about as much as I used to, but I can walk the dog every single day. I can cook for myself. I can clean for myself. I generally have the ability to do stuff like that on a daily basis, get out and about, do the stuff I need to do, which was a complete impossibility a couple of years ago, especially when I was going through what I'm sure a lot of you have, which is the intense weight loss where you think, wow, I mean, I do not want this. I actually miss being the way I was. Anyway, back to the point I was making. I would highly suggest you look into cannabis oil. What I did before I took it was I went and spoke to my doctor and I said, look, I'm on a whole flurry of medicines at the moment, a whole boatload of pills every single day. Is this stuff going to affect what I'm already taking? And she said no. So I was like, great, I'll give it a go. It cost me £39.99 through Amazon. So obviously it's a very expensive option in terms of the potential benefits. However, I've had it for 3 months now and I haven't had to buy a top-up. So one thing has done it for me. So I'd imagine you're only going to buy maybe 3 of these a year, something like that. So it for the money you spend on it, I think it's probably worth a try. Like anything I will feature on the show that isn't a sponsor, if I ever end up getting that far, I would say try it yourself first, look into what other people have said about them. Obviously, if there are products that you think, well, that's a fake review, look for the other ones as well so that you get a balanced view of it. I would say try it. Anything that has a possibility of giving you a slight incremental increase in your health is always worth a go. So please give the cannabis oil and CBD droplets a go. It's very simple. You literally fill up the dropper, you put a couple of drops underneath your tongue, you hold it in your mouth for about a minute and then you swallow. It doesn't taste so good, but then again, you know what medicine does, the flavor's gone within a few seconds, and after that you can focus on the rest of your life. It takes about an hour to kick in typically, and you can take it up to, let's see, I think it said a maximum of 15 drops a day. I would start off slow. At the moment, I'm only taking it once every 2 days, and it does help quite a lot. So if you find that you've got a higher tolerance, you can either buy a slightly more potent version, or you can just take it more often and see how you go from there. Word of warning, it might make you feel a little bit groggy. One of the side effects does warn, it might give you diarrhea, but I mean, let's be honest, if we've got Crohn's disease and IBD or whatever it might be, we're pretty much used to diarrhea anyway. So if you are concerned about the side effects, have a read up of those first, but give it a go. Honestly, make sure that you aren't allergic to any of the ingredients, but I think the ingredients are pretty straightforward. Organic hemp seed oil, Cannabis sativa L hemp, and then it just has flower leaf stem extract. So it's very, very basic. So make sure you're not allergic, give it a go and see how it goes. If you do end up trying it and it does have some effect or no effect, or whatever the results may be, let me know and I will feature that on future episodes of the podcast. Okay, so now on to the final segment of this podcast. Full disclosure, this is taking place at least a week later than the rest of the podcast. I had to stop recording, and I've got loads of stuff going on in my life at the moment, so various things got in the way, like house stuff and family things and Christmas planning. And I also, even though I promised I wouldn't do it, I got into the editing thing, and I spent 2 days editing a 20-minute segment. So there is that. So I do apologize. Not that, you'll be listening to this in real time, so it doesn't make a massive difference, but I'm sorry if there's a significant difference in the sound quality or in, the background sound or my voice or anything like that. I do apologize now. That's because I stopped recording and picked up a while later. Now, the last segment of this podcast is something that I've kind of wanted to do for a while in one form or another. And the reason I haven't is because I didn't really have an appropriate outlet for it. And, I was thinking when I was planning this podcast, news is a good starting point. And then obviously from there, you want to talk about things like lifestyle and health tips and, maybe share stories that people might kind of send your way about, coping with IBDs. But something I thought was missing was kind of relevant additions to your life that can help ease the burden when you are in a particularly bad way. And what I mean by that is if you're having a really bad flare-up or if you're not feeling so great, sometimes you just kind of need to surround yourself with wonderful things that entertain you or that kind of ease the pain, and something that you can just readily pick up without any trouble. And this can be any number of things. This can be a streaming service. This could be something like, for example, Netflix or Amazon Prime or something like that, both of which I have access to. And I highly recommend, if you do have Crohn's disease or if you're just starting with it, that you subscribe to one of the streaming platforms, as well as the usual free things that you can get, like the BBC iPlayer and the various other independent channels. The reason I say that is because it's going to provide you with very easy access to various films and TV shows that you can use to fill the time while you're trying to recover and get your energy back. Now, it's not going to be exclusively talking about streaming services in this part of the show. I'm also going to talk about books and possibly radio plays and podcasts that you might want to listen to, and also activities that you can do. So what I'm calling this segment, and I'm sorry I keep waffling on about it before I even get to the actual thing I'm going to be reviewing, is the Bedridden Review. So basically, it's something that you can watch or read or listen to while you're recovering from your flare-up or whatever illness or ailment it might be at the time. And this time, for the very first episode, I thought I'd go with something that somewhat inspired elements of this podcast and has certainly inspired elements of the way I live my life now that I have full-blown Crohn's disease everywhere in my body. The book is called How to Be Idle, and it was written by a guy called Tom Hodgkinson. Now, it's not a recent book. I mean, it's kind of recent, but not, I think it's probably at least 15 years old now. Tom Hodgkinson has gone on to become the editor of his own magazine. I think it has an online presence, and possibly you can subscribe to get the paperback version, called The Idler. The book itself is it's kind of a mixture of things. Now, typically when I go for books, they usually fall into one of three categories. They're either a comic / graphic novel, so I'm just a huge comic book fan. The second category would be something like kind of quite heavy-going, hardcore philosophical books. So you've got Nietzsche, Marx, Kierkegaard, loads of other kind of generalized things like that. I'm not talking about self-help books. I don't tend to go for things like that. I'm talking more the kind of the classic literature, philosophical stories and books. War and Peace would be a good example, something I have. Also Crime and Punishment. So things that have taken on the guise of allegorical, philosophical books, but also like actual kind of manifesto type books as well. But the third category would be kind of biographical journal type things. I love a lot of John Ronson's books. I really like a lot of his work. He's so easy to read. You can just pick up and put down his books, and I will probably cover some of his novels in the not too distant future. But I've decided to go for Tom Hodgkinson's How to Be Idle today. Now, even though I've just outlined those three genres that I usually go for, this actually kind of falls somewhere between the philosophical and the kind of the non-fiction, light-hearted, biographical journal. This book is kind of a history of and description of the way Western life has gone, the way we conduct ourselves on a day-to-day and also hourly basis, because the book is broken up into chapters that are split into hours. So it might be, the time you wake up in the morning, 6 a.m., 7 a.m., whatever it might be, the time you get out of bed normally. And it looks at why we do that, how these things came about, gives examples of people who don't do this and still have successful lives, people who choose not to do this and still have, balanced lives and actually enjoy their lives more. It also looks at the way in Western culture we handle things like illness. So if somebody's got like a cold or a flu, they're encouraged to kind of pop a pill or take some sort of medicine and then just get on with it. Whereas in the past, certainly in the Victorian era, the focus was mainly on convalescence. So, we're obviously talking about long-term illnesses when we think about convalescence, but they used to do that for everyday illnesses as well. So instead of just like taking 8 paracetamol throughout the day, they would just take the day off and not worry so much about it if they were in a position to, and they weren't, say, working in a factory where they'd lose their jobs or something. But it also focuses on the reasons why we came to be in a society where you can't show weakness in terms of illness and stuff like that, and you have to carry on. It's this kind of puritanical need for you to be there to complete this job at 9 o'clock, and then finish it at 5 o'clock. There's also another part that talks about French winemakers, and it was really interesting because they have this saying, and I don't know what the French version of it is, but it translates to work less, produce more. And when I heard that, I was like, I don't quite understand how that would work. And what it means is they're not up at the crack of dawn. They're not there at 9 o'clock on the dot and finishing at 5 o'clock on the dot. What they do is they get into work kind of in the morning, early-ish in the morning. They work full tilt, full on, until they've got the job done. And then they stop. Doesn't matter if it's 5 o'clock, if it's 3:30, if it's 2 o'clock, they just down tools, that's them done for the day. The rest of the day, they can relax, they can unwind, they can spend time with their loved ones, they can enjoy each other's company, they might go out to the pub, they might go and do, they might take part in hobbies that they have. And actually, it's interesting that, the French have that in their culture. They also have this word called flâner or flâner. I don't know how you pronounce it, but basically the term means to walk without a specific purpose. So you are walking because you enjoy walking, taking in the scenery around you. It doesn't necessarily have to be out in nature. It can be in the city. It can be in the countryside. It can be in a kind of a rural area. It can be in a town. Anywhere you want. You can just walk with no specific purpose. You're not walking briskly and in one direction and trying to shove people out of your way. You're just kind of wandering, letting your mind go, having a think, taking in the sights and sounds and smells of everything around you, and just enjoying the day. And it seems obvious, a lot of things I'm saying here, but in day-to-day life, a lot of these things get forgotten. And I do feel that this book is very good at emphasizing them, reminding you of where they came from and why people used to do them, mostly for their health and well-being, but also how you can get it back in your life without necessarily, ruining your life and becoming a layabout. Although there is a section in there about Bartleby the Scrivener, which is a Melville book, where I can't remember what his job is, but basically he decides one day that he's just not going to do it. He's just going to become a bit of a layabout and says things, what's the phrase? I'd rather not, or something like that. I prefer not to. Something I can't remember. That's going to drive me mad. Anyway, he makes a conscious decision to stop working 9 to 5 because, as Tom Hodgkinson points out in this book, when people know they have to work from 9 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock in the evening with half hour or an hour for lunch. In fact, another thing he talks about, the disappearance of lunch in the book, which is a terrible thing. When people have those set hours, they're going to take whatever work they do have and they're going to stretch it out for that period of time. So instead of getting in at a certain point, working until the job is done and then stopping, people will sit in an office and drag things out, because if they look like they're not working, they'll be given more work, which isn't, part of their job. It might not even be, proper work. It might just be busy work. So it's also kind of begging the question, why do we have a culture where this is accepted as the norm? Why can't it be the other way? Before the Industrial Revolution, where people worked to order, or they worked until the job was done and then they stopped. Their lives didn't revolve around the accumulation of money to kind of make sure that they had absolutely everything in its right place. They chose jobs that they were specifically good at that didn't necessarily require them to be in a set place for a set amount of time. It's a very interesting book. I'm not giving it the full credit it deserves in the way I'm describing it, but I would honestly recommend reading it. It's a very light read. You can pick it up and put it down. You can digest it at your own pace, but also it makes you think about the way you're living your life. It certainly did for me when I many years ago, when I was in my 20s, I was working 60, 70 hours a week. And to be honest, it wasn't a good life. I personally was out of control. I was getting quite ill at times. I was alienating myself from people and pushing people away. And ultimately, even though I earned money doing it, it wasn't fun. And it ended up being for my detriment. I ended up becoming very bad in life in general as a result of working like this. And steadily through time, I've adjusted my working balance with the rest of my life so that I can live a slightly more balanced life. And as a result of that, I'm far happier now than I was when I was working full tilt all the time. Also, I don't have quite as many colds as I used to do. But I would highly recommend this book. So it's a Penguin book. You can get it probably just about anywhere. It's quite ever-present. It's... sorry, I just dropped it. Okay, so it's $9.99 in the UK. $18 in Canada. Yeah, this is definitely an older book. So it's probably cheaper than that now. But I'd imagine you can get second-hand copies of it for much cheaper than that. It's a wonderful little book. There is a sequel to it. I haven't read it. I'm told it's not as good as the first one. It's kind of more political in its drive than this, which is a bit more philosophical. So if you get a chance, please have a read of Tom Hodgkinson's wonderful How to Be Idle. Apparently it's a top 10 bestseller. They don't say where, it just says top 10 bestseller on the front. Usually it'll say New York Times or Sunday Times or something like that, but no, just a top 10 bestseller, and I can understand why, because it is a wonderful, wonderful read. So that's the end of the podcast. It's only taken about 3 weeks from beginning to end, and that's before I've even kind of gone through the process of trying to get it on iTunes, which I can't imagine is going to be straightforward, but I will try my best. And if you do have any messages, please get in touch with me. The Twitter page is available. It's at the Crohnscast. You can also email me. I'll put a link in the description for that because I still can't remember the actual email address. But get in touch with me on Twitter. Send me an email. Any way you can get in touch with me, please do. I'd love to hear your stories, your thoughts, your recommendations, any tips you might have for medication or lifestyle. any advice you might have for people who are starting with Crohn's, or people who have had it for years. I want to build up a little bit of a community here so that we can all kind of share stories and tips, because for me, starting with this condition, I had no idea what I was doing, and I still don't to a certain extent. I live by myself in the middle of nowhere with a puppy, and pretty much the only contact I have with people who have Crohn's disease is through my doctor and through Twitter. So if you do have stories, tips, and all of that stuff, please get in touch. We can put it on the podcast. Someone out there may hear it, and it may encourage them to seek a different course than they might already be on. It might also give them a little bit of hope for the future. And that's what we want, really, isn't it? A little bit of hope in our future, but also a sense of community so that we can deal with this as and when it arises. So for now, thank you very much for listening. Stay happy and stay strong.